Welcome back to Serious Talk, the show where we cut through the noise on agentic AI initiatives. I'm your host, Greg Banks. You can build the smartest agent in the world and still fail in production for one reason: tool access. Uncontrolled APIs, inconsistent permissions, brittle integrations, and zero governance. That's why MCP servers are suddenly everywhere in serious agent conversations. Today, we'll define what an MCP server actually is, why it matters, and how to decide whether to adopt a pre-built option, a governance platform, or build your own. We've also linked a visual artifact in the show notes to make the concepts easier to map. All right, let's jump right in. Tim and Gavin, welcome back to Serious Talk. Great to have you guys here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here and excited to talk about MCPs today and doing a little bit of a deeper dive. I know we've had several other episodes where we've looked at like maybe higher level components of AI agent architecture where we're comparing like agents versus MCPs versus skills, et cetera. Probably almost every episode we do that's AI agent focused, talk in some way, shape, or form. MCPs probably gets mentioned a few times. It's such a critical piece of an AI agent architecture. And so we thought it really made sense. And we've heard from some viewers as well, like it probably would make sense just do a deeper dive on like what is an MCP server and what are the different components you got to think of when you're building an MCP server and what are the different ways to create your own MCP server. There's kind of a whole economy being made in the AI space now of different ways of offering, being able to expose MCPs for your business. So that's what we'll be diving in deep today. Gavin, excited for the conversation. I guess maybe we kick off of just starting again with an overview of what is an MCP and what's an MCP server? Like, what does it mean to a business?
Yeah, so just at a high level, I like to think of MCPs as just an API layer. So it's the unlocking capability to allow agents to interact with your system's APIs. We have all over the place, almost every system has APIs that can be utilized to either pull data, fetch data, do something within the system. You start to run into problems when you give agents the capabilities to do that directly, primarily in the sense that it may just mess up the call. It's not deterministic. So it will attempt to make an HTTP call out. You also have security issues there. So the idea is separating the concept and creating that deterministic versus non-deterministic line and agentic methodology to say, okay, we've decided what we want to do. Now the MCP server is going to take it the rest of the way to actually make the call to your tool. So it just provides you with that kind of third-party layer to provide security so you can lock down exactly what APIs you're going to expose to the agent. It makes it deterministic, and it also is reusable. So you can build multiple agents calling the same MCP server. So you're going to want to, even without the security, even without the deterministic style, you really want to divide that in a way that's reusable. So MCP is a way of providing all three.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to kind of go about it and kind of view it. And I think at the end of the day, it's similar to what we've talked before. MCP is often just raw capabilities for an agent, the raw capability of being able to access data on some other system. And so kind of when you're looking at MCPs versus agents, like what are some of the key differences between both of those, and why is MCP kind of stand apart from agents as its own distinct kind of section within an AI agent architecture?
The power of the agent is it's powered by an LLM, unlike an MCP. So it has the ability to reason and understand a user prompt or input. So that's really what you want your agent to focus on. We talked about it in some of the previous episodes. That's your brain, and it's going to decide what it wants to do with the prompt, and that's what it's going to hand things off to the MCP. So by the time you get to the MCP server, you've already decided what you want to do. This is where things get deterministic, and you're able to make that direct call to your services. And the response back from the MCP server, your agent will also reason with that response as well. So your agent's going to compile a call out to your MCP server with the desired specifications that the MCP server has. And from there, your MCP server takes it, handles security, and makes the actual deterministic call out to your API.
Yep. Super helpful. And like one of the things that a lot of people I think kind of struggle with, because there's a lot of parallels between them, is like, why even have MCPs when you have APIs already? What does MCP kind of add that APIs didn't have before. So like, why even have it in your agent architecture rather than just doing API integrations between your agents and your other systems?
Yeah, so I think it makes sense to break it down into a scenario. If you want your agent to interact with Salesforce, Salesforce has a massive host of APIs available to you. So breaking it out to MCP, these are the benefits you're going to get in comparison. If you host it with just an agent and make the agent do callouts, you're running security risk because that agent is essentially going to be writing code for these callouts in a way that's going to try and hit all of these endpoints. It has access to every potential endpoint that Salesforce has essentially publicized. Additionally, you're going to have to put that information into each agent that you want to interact with Salesforce. So you're kind of redoing a whole bunch of work. And on top of that, it's more likely that your agent's going to get those callouts wrong. If it's having to build those code having to make those decisions, then a lot of times you're going to see a much higher scale of failure. So for those three purposes, that's when you really want to divide things out into MCPs. And your MCPs should be thought about as layers on top of a system. So if you have an architecture within your ecosystem that, let's say you have a self-hosted system, you would build an MCP layer on top of that, those APIs, and you would use that MCP for communication between all the agents you build in your ecosystem. Same thing for your CRM or ERP. You typically want to look or develop an MCP server to communicate with those tools specifically so you can control reusability, security, and have higher degrees of success.
Yeah. Yeah. I think even, boiling it down, and it's spot on with all of that, boiling down even simpler is like, it's not really a question of either or. MCPs use APIs all the time. It's just MCP is a useful wrapper around APIs because they're working with a different type of client. They're working with an agent, not a human on the other end, or even another system. And so it's a wrapper around APIs that sends and retrieves data in a format that's really usable for AI agents, so you can get more out of it, can be more secure, more scalable, et cetera. So, a lot of people are like, oh, is it an either or? No, it's not an either or. It's a wrapper around that makes it more usable for a new type of client we have, which is AI agents, which I think is a useful way to think about it. Yeah, so kind of when we're looking at kind of an agent architecture for agents to MCPs, what are some key considerations kind of when designing that call out, both from the agent, the router, to the tools, and then the APIs? What are some key considerations businesses got to keep in mind?
Yeah, so when you're building out your MCP, inside that MCP architecture, you're going to have a key list or a list of tools that the MCP is supplying to the agents. That agent takes that list and then determines which tool it's going to utilize. So when you're building out the MCP, the most important thing is to think, what is the limited amount of scope that I want my agents to work in? Less is better, just like we talked about with context. You want your MCP server to do specifically what you want your agents to have access to in your external systems. So it's really important to make sure you limit that for security reasons. The other thing to keep in mind is it's just like regular integrations as well. So typically you're going to do some sort of user authentication. That MCP is going to act like a user. So you want to handle your security just like you regularly would with any other integration. That user needs to have restricted access to things that you only want them to have access to in that system. So really big call out there is just treat it like a regular integration, have a limited scope of tools. And at the same time, one of the other things that I think is interesting between MCP builds is you can build an MCP to be system instance agnostic. And what I mean by that is, like, a good example of this is the Salesforce MCP. You supply the Salesforce MCP your Salesforce credentials. So the Salesforce MCP tool, it can interact with any Salesforce instance out there. And that's really powerful. That might not be a great fit for you when you're building your MCP. Maybe you want your MCP to be specific to your instance, so the MCP itself handles the security and the agent just calls it. So those are two different types of architecture. I would say if you're looking at cloud hosted, common platform, CRM and ERPs, you might want to look at utilizing existing MCPs, or if for secure purposes, potentially building one out yourself. But I would start in the lane of looking at MCPs that already exist and are published by those platforms.
Yeah, it's kind of its own economy that's been created around, creating MCP solutions for businesses. And so I always like putting things in perspective of if I'm a CTO or an executive at a business that is building out an AI agent architecture, and I know I need to add raw capabilities. I need to add access to different systems. I got data all over the place that I need agents to work with. What are the different levers I have when it comes to building out those MCP capabilities? And I think there's kind of three main camps of potential solutions. You alluded to a couple of them there. And so I think it starts first with, are there existing public MCPs already available that meet the requirements of what I need to do? So you gave the example of the Salesforce MCP. So that's already an available, hosted, published MCP that you can hook into and use if you're trying to access Salesforce data within your own org. Don't really need to do a lot of customization there. It's ready. A lot of times that's included with the software costs of particular platforms. Maybe it's an add-on sometimes, or maybe it's just publicly available, to be able to hook into, and you authenticate with, existing users that you have. But that's kind of like camp number one, or layer one. Layer two, which is in between that and then what you refer to as like building out your own hosted proprietary MCP, between already available, published, and then doing your own, is this middle camp of like MCP governance platforms. And so I think a couple examples that we see in the space a lot would be like Boomi MCP, or a MuleSoft Agent Fabric more recently, and would be kind of two examples. And so it's a platform that exists that allows you to expose different MCP endpoints all within one platform. So, a lot of them have like a clicks, not code type of flavor to them, and a standardized governance and kind of admin framework to it. So you can manage all of your MCP capabilities in one spot, and then build out your MCP capabilities and architecture there, right? So that's kind of the middle layer. And then the last layer you have is just DIY, build your own MCP server. So there you have to create the server or the application that you're trying to build. You'd have to build the API connections. You then would have to host that MCP somewhere. You'd probably have to hook it into some type of monitoring solution as well for error monitoring. So there's a couple other kind of software or technical decisions you'd have to make to be able to do that yourself. Then you would own kind of the maintenance of that and the hosting costs of that long term. I guess anything else to add to that, or what are your thoughts of like this kind of a new way we've started thinking about, of kind of like the three layers or three camps for MCPs? What are your thoughts there, and what have you seen in terms of companies with that?
Yeah, that's a good call out on the three different options. What I would say is, if you're somebody that's evaluating, let's say you're a software as a service company and you have created software that people utilize, I definitely think that there should be conversations in your future on how do we get this to be MCP capable. If people are calling into our APIs, or even just internally capable to leverage internal agents. And what you should look at there is, are we already utilizing a tool, an ETL tool that has MCP capabilities? You mentioned MuleSoft. They have the ability to turn their integration flows into MCPs. So that's a really powerful tool set. That's something I would be looking at. And then I'd be looking at, if I don't have an ETL tool, what type of infrastructure do I need to put in place? Where am I going to host this MCP server? How are the agents going to interact with it? What type of security do I need to bring to the table? And then on top of that, I think in general, if you're somebody in a place where you're evaluating new technologies for your company, one question that should be coming up in every one of these sales pitches is, are you MCP capable? Because the future of these platforms will absolutely involve agent integration, whether or not it's going to be external clients or your internal agents that you build. So you're absolutely going to want to ask those questions and make sure that they have a roadmap. And I would be evaluating your current systems as well to see if they have plans to create MCP layers on top of their APIs.
Yep. No, I would agree with that. And I think it's just something that's going to be more front and center in terms of evaluating software or technical solutions down the road, more and more for businesses. I guess any other key takeaways? I think, one of my key takeaways here is like MCP seems to be here to stay. It started as a protocol. People weren't sure if it was going to get adopted. Seems to be pretty ubiquitous now in terms of AI agent architectures and companies across the board and large LLM labs too adopting MCP capability throughout all of 2025. I think going in now into 2026 and forward, it's here to stay. So I think understanding what it is, where it fits in your architecture, how to evaluate it, and when to use it is going to be really, really key in terms of your decision-making kind of tool set down the road if you're managing technical teams or technical solutions for businesses. But I guess any other takeaways from your side, Gavin?
Yeah, I would say just looking in the future, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of these really powerful platforms push to make their own MCP servers. There's a lot of open source Git repositories that exist today that are basically people in a community building MCP servers for existing solutions. To me, it seems like this is like the emergence of a new API protocol. So I think we're going to see, from a developer's point of view, this is something that everyone really needs to learn in the development seat, because this is just going to be another pathway for integration. And I think very quickly it's going to become a standard across a lot of systems.
Yeah. And I think the last takeaway is just remembering if you're evaluating and managing technology solutions, and that could involve needing AI agent capabilities that would require MCP servers. I see and hear a lot of people thinking like they can only use pre-built MCPs, and they think it'd be outlandish or just way out of reach to build their own MCP. And then I see others where it's like, okay, we only can build our own MCP. I don't want to hook into these. No, there's three kind of main options or levers at the table. So I think this is one of the key takeaways is, there's existing MCPs. You can evaluate that. Is there something I can hook into right now that gets me what I need for my AI agents as a capability? There's platforms. Do I have an ETL platform or do I need to go look for a platform? Do I want a more, governed approach that's hosted? I don't want to host my own pieces. So platforms that allow me to govern my MCPs and expose my MCPs across the board. And then there's always the DIY, and the DIY option is doable. It's going to become more and more ubiquitous with software development projects down the road, I think. And so I think that absolutely should be an option on the table when you're evaluating your courses of action. So, but yeah, I think, pretty good overview. I think this will be a really valuable topic that'll continue to come up in multiple episodes as we move forward, and something that businesses are going to continue to talk more and more about moving forward.
Yeah, as we mentioned in the intro about an artifact, when we get into some of these topics, there's a lot of words, right? There's a lot of ways to break this down. So we've got a visual or series of visuals that go with helping with this. My brain went to just thinking back over a couple of decades of approaching things like this that used to be just build versus buy. But what I hear you guys saying is you're evaluating some of the tools you've already bought, like MuleSoft as an example. You may build within that. So if you have tools you've bought, before you go buy another one, evaluate the ones you've got and see if that functionality is there or coming. So whatever your AI build out timeline may look like, make this a part of that conversation, so you're not having to buy another tool mid-year or change the tool you bought mid-year because they don't have an MCP option on the plate for you. Thanks again for your time, guys. Appreciate the artifact. I think this will really help people consume what you talked about in a more logical way. Any takeaways before we go?
Yeah, no, I think we're good. Have a good one. Appreciate the time.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. That brings us to the close of today's episode of Serious Talk. If this discussion clarified how MCP servers fit into modern AI agent architectures and help frame the security, governance, and build versus buy decisions leaders are facing, be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss upcoming episodes. And if you have a moment to leave a review, it meaningfully helps the show reach a wider audience. Before you move on, here's a practical takeaway. This week, select one of your core systems in your environment, your CRM, your ERP, or some other critical internal application, and ask a simple question. What is our MCP strategy? Are you leveraging an existing MCP, adopting a governance platform like the ones we discussed, or does this require a custom build? Addressing that question early can help prevent significant rework and risk down the line. As always, you'll find links and recommended resources in the show notes, including the visual artifact we referenced to help ground these concepts. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Jason Fowler for allowing us use of his song, Mystery Road. If someone on your team is actively building or deploying AI agents, share this episode with them, and we'll see you next time on Serious Talk.